World War II officially ended in 1945, but not everyone got the memo. Deep in the jungles of the Philippines, one Japanese soldier kept fighting for nearly 3 more decades, and during that time, he survived like a ghost, evading search teams, engaging in gunfights, and dismissing every attempt to reach him as enemy trickery. This is the true story of Hiroo Onoda, the soldier who refused to believe the war had ended. The story begins in 1944. Hiroo Onoda was just 22 years old when he was deployed to Lubang Island in the Philippines. But this wasn't just any ordinary soldier. Onoda had been specially trained at the Nakano School, Japan's elite intelligence academy, where they taught guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and psychological operations. These weren't regular infantry troops. They were the special forces of their time. His mission seemed straightforward: conduct guerrilla operations, destroy Allied airstrips, and prevent enemy landings on Lubang Island. But there was one order that would haunt him for the next 3 decades. His commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, gave him explicit instructions. Never surrender. Never take your own life. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, will come back for you. Those words would echo in Onoda's mind for 10,647 days. When the war officially ended on September 2, 1945, Onoda and 3 other soldiers retreated deep into the Lubang jungle. Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka had no idea that Emperor Hirohito had surrendered. No idea that atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No idea that the world had moved on. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary survival story of the 20th century. For nearly 30 years, these men lived like ghosts in the jungle. They survived on stolen rice, coconuts, wild bananas, and occasional cattle they would slaughter under the cover of darkness. They built makeshift shelters that they would abandon and rebuild whenever they felt discovered. They maintained their weapons with religious precision, cleaning and oiling them daily as if an inspection could happen at any moment. But the story gets darker. Onoda and his men weren't just hiding. They were still fighting what they believed was an active war. They conducted raids on local villages, stealing supplies and food. They engaged in firefights with local police and farmers. Over the decades, they killed approximately 30 people and wounded over 100 more. To Onoda, these weren't innocent civilians. They were enemy combatants in an ongoing conflict. But wait, didn't anyone try to tell them the war was over? Didn't the Japanese government make any attempts to bring them home? Oh, they tried. Starting in 1945, American forces dropped thousands of leaflets over the jungle in Japanese, declaring the war over and urging surrender. And guess what Onoda's response was? Allied propaganda. In 1952, family members came to the island with loudspeakers, broadcasting messages from home. Onoda's reaction? Psychological warfare tactics. They dropped newspapers, family photographs, and personal letters. Nothing worked. The most heartbreaking attempt came in 1954, when Onoda's own brother came to Lubang Island with a search party. They spent weeks in the jungle, calling out Hiroo's name, pleading with him to come home. Onoda later admitted he could hear his brother's voice echoing through the trees. But he remained hidden, convinced it was an elaborate trap. In his mind, no true Japanese soldier would ever surrender, so anyone claiming otherwise had to be the enemy in disguise. That same year, tragedy struck. During a skirmish with a search party, Corporal Shimada was shot and killed. 3 men became 2. The isolation began to take its toll. In 1949, Private Akatsu had had enough. He left the group one night and eventually surrendered to Filipino authorities in 1950. Onoda felt betrayed, but he pressed on with Kazuka, the 2 of them becoming even more paranoid and isolated. The years blended together in an endless cycle of survival, vigilance, and violence. 1955, 1960, and 1965. The world around them transformed while they remained frozen in time. The Beatles rose to fame. A man walked on the moon. Japan became an economic powerhouse. And still, Onoda waited for orders that would never come. In 1959, the Japanese government officially declared Hiroo Onoda dead. His family held a funeral. His name was etched on a memorial. But the dead man continued his mission, unaware that he'd been mourned and buried in absentia. The breaking point came in 1972. After 27 years of jungle warfare, Onoda and Kazuka encountered a Filipino patrol. In the ensuing firefight, Kazuka was shot and killed. Onoda was now completely alone. So how do you convince a man who's been fighting alone in the jungle for 30 years that the war is over? How do you reach someone who's dismissed every attempt at contact as enemy deception? This is where Norio Suzuki steps in, a 24-year-old Japanese adventurer with a bizarre bucket list. In 1974, Suzuki announced his intention to find 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. While most people thought he was crazy, Suzuki was determined. He traveled to Lubang Island with nothing but camping gear and an unshakable belief that he could succeed where everyone else had failed. Incredibly, within just 4 days, Suzuki found Onoda. The moment was surreal. A young, hippie-looking adventurer stumbling through the jungle suddenly comes face-to-face with a weathered 52-year-old soldier who's been living like a phantom for 3 decades. Suzuki simply walked up to Onoda's camp and called out, "Onoda-san!" But even this miraculous encounter wasn't enough. When Suzuki explained that the war had been over for 29 years, Onoda refused to believe him. "I will only surrender," he declared, "when I receive orders from my commanding officer." Suzuki returned to Japan with photographs of Onoda and an impossible mission. Find a man who had given orders to a soldier 30 years ago and convince him to travel to a remote Philippine island to officially end World War II for one stubborn holdout. Against all odds, Suzuki tracked down Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, now 58 years old and working as a quiet bookseller. When Suzuki explained the situation, Taniguchi was stunned. The young officer who had given those fateful orders 3 decades earlier agreed to make the journey. On March 9, 1974, in a small clearing on Lubang Island, one of the most extraordinary military ceremonies in history took place. Major Taniguchi, in his civilian clothes, stood before Lieutenant Onoda, still in his hand-patched uniform, and formally relieved him of duty. The words were simple, but profound. "Lieutenant Onoda, you are relieved of your mission." After 10,947 days of war, Hiroo Onoda finally laid down his arms. The surrender ceremony was surreal. Onoda presented his sword, his rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, and several hand grenades to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. His uniform was in tatters, held together by decades of careful repairs. His boots were makeshift creations cobbled together from salvaged materials. But his military bearing was perfect, the same disciplined posture he had maintained since 1944. President Marcos, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, granted Onoda a full pardon for all actions during his 30-year holdout. It was a gesture of remarkable grace, considering the lives lost and families affected by Onoda's unwavering mission. The return to Japan was overwhelming. Onoda was greeted by massive crowds, media frenzy, and a world he no longer recognized. The Japan he remembered, a nation of emperor worship, military honor, and collective sacrifice, had been replaced by a pacifist, materialistic society focused on economic growth. He felt like a stranger in his own homeland. The culture shock was profound. When Onoda left Japan in 1944, the country was in the midst of total war. When he returned in 1974, Japan was one of the world's wealthiest nations. The contrast was jarring. In interviews, he expressed dismay at what he saw as Japan's loss of traditional values and warrior spirit. Unable to adjust to modern Japanese society, Onoda made a surprising decision. In 1975, he emigrated to Brazil, where he became a cattle rancher in a Japanese farming colony. There, surrounded by other Japanese expatriates who understood his values, he found peace. He married a Japanese woman and built a quiet life far from the spotlight. But Onoda's story didn't end in exile. In the 1980s, he returned to Japan to run a nature camp for youth, hoping to instill what he called mental toughness in a generation he believed had grown soft. Discipline, perseverance, and duty, the very values that sustained him in the jungle, became the core of his teachings. Asked what he thought about during those decades in hiding, his reply was stark: "Carrying out my orders." Onoda's unwavering loyalty was both admirable and tragic. He embodied samurai virtues of honor, perseverance, and loyalty taken to an extreme that caused needless suffering. His story challenges us to consider the boundaries between duty and delusion, heroism and fanaticism. Psychologically, his resilience was astonishing. Alone, without command or confirmation, he maintained military discipline through strict daily routines, patrolling, cleaning weapons, gathering intelligence, as if the war had never ended. Even after learning the truth, Onoda never expressed regret. In his eyes, he had simply done what a good soldier must. Hiroo Onoda died on January 16, 2014, aged 91. His obituary made headlines worldwide. He had lived long enough to see Japan transformed into the peaceful democracy it became the day he disappeared into the jungle. So would you have done the same in his shoes? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this unbelievable, wait till you hear about the one forgotten battle that shaped the entire modern world and why you haven't heard about it. You'll be shocked at how it echoes Onoda's story in unexpected ways. If stories like this fascinate you, hit that subscribe button like it's your mission, and don't retreat until it turns gray.